Hey, how's it going everyone? This is Brennan Bias from Chicken.com and welcome to another Tutorial Tuesday. Today's video is, let's just say it's really special because I'm finally releasing something that you guys have wanted ever since you first laid eyes on it. And so, without further ado, I present to you, drumroll please, my Rainmeter desktop background in all of its glory, PSD and everything, 100% free. Aren't you guys excited? You guys have wanted this for ever and a half, and you can finally get your grubby little hands on it. Alright, so maybe they're not grubby, but you get the idea. You guys can finally download this thing because I've basically decided to move onto a different kind of background, kind of clean things up. You know, I like change, so that's what I, decided to do. So anyway, I would really love to just give this away, for no reason whatsoever, but I put a lot of time and effort into this, so it's kind of hard for me to just let it go. So there is a catch in order for you to download this. All I need from you is to like this video. That's it. Like this video. And as soon as I get the video to, let's say 300 likes, sounds like a lot, but I know you can do it. There's like several thousand people that view these videos. And so, yeah, 300 likes, and you guys get this download. That's all there is to it. So, now that that's out of the way, let's do something that's actually worth watching. A lot of you have asked how I've actually went about creating this particular background. So I'm just going to go through some of the ideas and some of the techniques that I used in order to create this bad boy. And keep in mind that I'm not going to do like a full-on tutorial because I've spent like hours and hours and hours just getting this thing, perfectly right. And it's kind of hard to condense that all into, one little tutorial, I guess. So let's get cracking, shall we? So obviously before creating this background, I needed to have some kind of idea behind it and, to kind of base the wallpaper around. And what I decided on was that my goal was to create a background that involved quite a bit of Rainmeter. And so I went around, downloaded a couple things that were Rainmeter related, like Omnimo, Tech A, and things of that sort. And what I ended up doing was I placed them on my desktop with a black background. Obviously, this is not the screen capture of what I did back then, since I long since deleted it. Point is, I put the certain items on my desktop where I wanted them to be, and I did so with a completely black background. And as for these little gadgets in the middle, I placed them all over the place on this black background so I could cut them out. Now let me show you what I mean. I was able to cut these out from my background with print screen. Let me just move these around for you. And since they were on a black background, all I had to do was set their blend mode to screen. So if I were to put these to normal, you would see that these are literally just, straight up taken from my desktop with a black background behind them. So these were the things that I was able to snatch up and implement into this PSD file. So that way I could get a better idea of the sizing of the ring that I would later create and, things of that sort. So anyway, so I got those going, and let's start turning everything off over here, and basically just start from the ground up. Look at all the stuff I had to do. Okay, so here's where I started. I basically just had a solid gray background, the entire size of both of my monitors. So that's like 3000 some odd by 1080. Okie dokie. So let's see, where did I go from here? So the first thing that I wanted to have was a basic glow in the middle of the document. So all I did, I took a soft brush and I planted that sucker right in the middle. So let's see what color this was at 100%. And let's sample that color that's right there in the middle. So I basically used like a dark bluish teal color for that color there. And all I did was dumb the opacity down to about 22%, so that way it wasn't so overwhelming. And there is a lot of banding going on in the middle here, but I kind of helped to cover that up by adding in this huge freaking shadow in the middle. And also this shadow was kind of helpful, so that way later on all of the elements, wrong ones. So that way all of these different things would be able to stand out on top of that background there. Because without that shadow, things would have been drowned out, you could say. So obviously that center shadow was created with a, the brush tool set to black with a, the hardness was probably up to about like between 50 and 75%, somewhere in there. And let's see what that looks like. So yeah, that's roughly about right. That was at 82% hardness. So that's kind of how I went about doing that. Nothing too overly complicated or anything like that. Pretty straightforward. And let's see. So next up, obviously, what I did was I worked on the logo. Okay, so maybe it wasn't next, but it was definitely one of the next things on there. And the logo, let me click off of this. This is getting distracting. The logo I set to a black color later on, so that way it would kind of blend with everything else a little bit better. But as you saw in the original screenshot, it was more of a grayish kind of a color. I have a tutorial on that you can view if you want, because yeah, I've already basically made a tutorial on how to create this exact freaking thing. So if you have any questions about that, just literally watch the video. Alright, so let's turn off that insignia. Obviously, one of the first things that I created was the ring in the middle. So let's turn on that ellipse. There it is. All it is a beautiful ring. So let me just really quickly go over how I went about making this ring. So let's go up and grab the rotator, because I essentially wanted to base that ring around the size of the rotator. So with that rotator on, I'm going to make a new layer somewhere below it. I'm going to grab my ellipse tool, and I'm going to use a color that's a little bit more bluish kind of a color, just so that way I can see it and all that. And I'm going to click and drag while holding Shift and make a ring that's roughly the same size as those smaller dashes on that outer ring right there. And so that's looking pretty good, so I'll let go. There we go, we've got a nice little ring here. And then I used my path selection tool, selected the path, hit Control-Alt-T, that would be Command-Option-T if you're on a Mac. Scale this sucker down until it's about halfway through this inner ring here. Maybe I'll do it a little bit more, something like that. So I will commit that transformation, and with this inner circle selected, I went up here and changed it from combine shapes to subtract from front shape. And so very simply, that just made a hole inside of that circle. And so now we've got this beautiful ring here. And obviously, on top of that, all I did was add in some layer styles. So let's just take a look at what some of those are here. So what I ended up doing was I added an inner shadow with blend mode set to color dodge, color of white. The opacity is around 80%. And I amped up the choke and the size there. And so that gave us a little bit of a glow on the inner edge of the ring. And then below that is a gradient overlay from a dark blue. So, yep, basically just a really dark blue to a, I am accidentally adding colors in here. So I basically faded that to a slightly lighter blue. And of course you have that set to an angle of 120 degrees, and there you go, you have a cool little gradient from the top left to the bottom right. And then obviously a nice little outer glow to kind of spice things up a little bit. So if we were to turn all of these suckers on, and let's start putting them, I need to go to my move tool, there we go. And basically just start positioning these where I want them to be later on in the, well, I'm trying to say is I'm going to position these in a place where I would like to position them with the actual Rainmeter program. There you go. And so that way it just gives me an idea of how everything is going to look, and, you know, just kind of like a view into the future sort of thing. So that's looking pretty good. And then if we include that with the insignia logo, we're starting to get something pretty cool. However, we do have a bit of a blue glow going on here, and I wanted that to kind of show up inside the logo. So what I ended up doing was where are those layers at? There we go. I ended up creating a new layer called Insignia Color, and that layer has a layer mask, which is basically the exact same shape and size as the logo. And so let me turn that on and I'll show you what that was. And let me turn off the mask. And so this is basically all that layer was. It's just a bunch of blue splotches kind of going around. And I did this with the intention of filling in some of the edges of the logo. And you can see there's a little bit of blue along the edges over here and over there. And I basically just made it look like there was a bunch of blue spilling over from the ring. And you'll notice that there's a random blue splotch right here. I will explain that later on. And of course, this wasn't really enough for me, so I added in another layer to kind of help fill that in a little bit. So a little before and after, you can see how that kind of helps fill in the background of the logo. So that is what helped that to look as if it was right next to the ring. So pretty nice to do. Now the next thing I worked on obviously was the dragon, since everything is, starting to come together and all that. And the dragon, he's really tricky. If I switch over to my path selection tool, you'll just see all of the paths that I ended up using to create this sucker. But to get a better look at this, I'm going to solo out the dragon, put the fill back up to 100%, just to kind of show you how I went about creating him. Now, as you can see, he started off as basically another ring, just kind of like what I did with the other ellipse there. However, I was able to manage to get his tail to taper off to a point. So let me show you again the idea that goes behind that. So once again, just making a new ellipse here. And of course, making another ellipse inside of that to create a ring. And I got the size of that based on some of the elements that were inside of it, like that. If you remember, I had all of those things right there in the middle, and so that's what I used as a kind of foundation to decide the size of the dragon. All right. So, the ring part is obviously really easy. You're probably wondering, most of all, how I went about creating the taper of the end of the tail there. And that's actually pretty straightforward, takes a little bit of effort. I swapped over to my pen tool, make sure to set the shape, and I've also got it set to subtract from front shape. And so with that, all I did was I basically cut through the ring to erase it, and kind of create a beginning point and an end point. So I'd want his head to be a little bit more forward, so I'd go to my direct selection tool, move this a little bit more forward, and that would be more where the beginning of the head is. And this part is actually looking like it's in a good spot right there, so I would just call that good. And as for the taper of the end of the tail, that's just more pen tool. So swapping back to my pen tool, and actually, let's select off of the path there. And for the pen tool, let's combine the shapes, and we'll keep it as a fill of black and all that. Let's start our first anchor point right here, which is essentially the same exact point where it's ending at. And I would go a little up and to the right, decide on where I wanted the tail to end, and just add another point, and let's get this sucker to match up. So let's just grab that and use our fantastic Photoshop skills to essentially match up the bend of that line there and match that up perfectly along with the inner part of the ring. So then we'll just bring this other point over, point it somewhere in that general direction, go down, at our next point at the other corner, and we'll click and drag this that direction, and we'll let go. And so now we've got a nice little, taper on the tail. And of course, I'd take this point, move it a little bit more this way, and combined the shape, and there you go. You've got a flattened shape, or not really flattened, whatever. I have no idea what I'm trying to say there. You get the general idea. We've got a nice tail going on. So next up, I worked on the head of the dragon. And unfortunately, I'm really not talented enough to just go in and create a path for such a beautiful dragon head. So what I ended up doing was I went to Google, searched through like a bunch of vector dragons that people had, already made, because I'm not talented enough to make one on my own. And I essentially just imported one I liked, and I traced out the head, and voila, you got, another dragon head. Look at it. Pretty simple. Okay, so next up what I worked on was the wings, which again are really, really straightforward. All I did was I made the first part of the wing go up and into the edge of the canvas, because that's kind of how I had it envisioned, was, kind of overlapping into the area that you can't see over here. And then I just used the pen tool, here, had it taper off to a point way out there. And the thing that I did that's a little bit different than what you think I might have done was I didn't go through and make the wings on the same path as this first wing. So what I actually ended up doing was this continued through and just kind of went back down into the shoulder of the dragon. And the reason I did that was to have an idea of where the curve would go on that wing. Because if I were to, kind of go through and make a point right there, try and make a wing and come back, I would end up making a really sloppy curve between the two wings and between the third wing and the shoulder. It would have been really sloppy, and it wouldn't have continued and flowed very well. So I did this one wing by itself and created both of these wings separately. And I'm saying wings when I really should say, like, I don't know what the word would be for these, but you get the general idea. Either way, I used more pen tool, create those parts of the wings. And in addition to that, I created a membrane. So let me turn this up a little bit. I made another path for the membranes here. So again, I just kept this on the inside of the wing and then had an arc back and then go back through. And I did that twice. And then this membrane, again, really straightforward. Pen tool, back and forth. Really, really, really straightforward. And on top of that, I knew that I wanted to have a little bit of depth on top of all this. So what I ended up making was another membrane, except I made this one white. Well, not really white, but like a lightish gray color. And these basically represented the areas where I wanted some highlights in the wing. And so with all of these things in place, I was ready to create some masks, do some custom brushing, and create an awesome fire-breathing dragon. So let's set these guys back down to what they were before, opacity-wise. Alright, so I've went ahead and I've turned back on all of the other layers that we've already gone through. And we're ready to start looking at how I made this dragon pop out. Because obviously this thing is set to a really freaking low opacity. You really can't see him. So what did I do to make this guy pop out? So here's what I did. I took the dragon and I made him into a selection. And I used that selection to create a layer mask for a group called Dragon Depth. So let's turn off the membrane highlights, and let's turn on Dragon Depth. And so let me give you a look at what's going on here. I basically made some different layers. One layer is solely for the shading on the edge of the dragon to kind of give it like an inner shadow feeling, but it's actually not inner shadow. It's just, some custom brush work with the brush tool. And I did that all the way around the dragon to add in depth. So that way it gave it like a slightly 3D look. And then I also had a layer in there for this blue glow. And since everything is masked to the dragon, if I were to move this all off to the side, you'd see that that is exactly, the same shape and size of the dragon, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. So that helped everything kind of pop out a little bit. And I forgot to mention that I made an eye, just kind of made a vector shape for the eye, and I gave it an inner shadow, gave it a gradient overlay, gave it an outer glow, kind of the same things that I did for the ring there. And so also what I did was I added in some shading for the membrane. So instead of actually using the membrane that I made earlier, I used it as a layer mask and used a soft brush to go through and create some shadows and things of that sort. So you can kind of see how all of that is looking right there. And also I used the inner membrane to create this kind of this glowing feeling. So let's turn off this, and you can kind of see that the brushwork is actually pretty freaking sloppy going through. But with that layer mask for the membrane highlight, I was able to get a pretty cool looking effect, even though it's a little sloppy here and there. So we're off to a really good start. What's some of the other things that I added in? Let's see, I made a really cheesy little flame, again with more pen tool shapes and things of that sort. But then on top of that, I added an actual thing of fire, gave it some hue and saturation to kind of blend it with that, and that's looking pretty cool. And that's also why I added in that little spotlight of blue on top of the logo back there. As you recall earlier, that was kind of just there for no reason whatsoever. That's why I added that in, because there was some fire there. Pretty straightforward, I think. And on top of all that, I added in some noise to kind of make everything look like it was a little grainy. And all I did for that, as you can see, this is, whoops, go back to normal there. This is essentially like your standard black and white noise layer, just inverted. So that way I could set it to a blend mode of multiply, and all of those black and gray dots would kind of go through and add some grain to all of the pixels there. And on top of that, I added some curves to brighten things up a little bit. I also added in a vignette along the edges using, it's a gradient overlay layer. And I also added in some more noise later on. And something to keep in mind right now, guys, this probably looks like complete and utter crap. Don't think it's because the image is low quality or anything like that. It's simply because of the video compression, kind of trying to keep the file size down. So just something to keep in mind if things look a little bit low quality. Okay, so with all of that, I had everything set up for all of those things in the middle. That part was perfect, that part was beautiful. However, I still needed to add in the portion for the menus and stuff that were at the bottom. So what I ended up doing was I imported this screenshot and used some rulers to get an idea of where that bar would go at the bottom that I wanted. So let's turn on the bottom bar, show you what that looks like. All it is a black bar with the opacity down to about 50%, and it's got a slight drop shadow going on, so that way it looks like it fades a little bit. Now, having it just like that wasn't good enough for me. It was missing a little bit of just a little bit of pop to it. So what I ended up making was two lines, a black line and a white line with the fill down to about 10%. And what these two lines did is if you look at the top edge of the bar, it gives it a slight little bevel to it, which I couldn't really get with the bevel and emboss. So let's zoom in really close. You can see there's the black line to represent a shadow, a white line to represent a highlight, and those two lines created a nice little like bevel to it. I don't know, just something that I really liked. Now also, what I ended up doing with the screenshot of all of those pieces in place is I used them as a reference to place all of these little lines as separators. So let's turn that off, turn on the blue lines, and there you go. These were actually really simple to create. All I did was I used the line tool, and of course I just used like a really light blue color, and if you click and drag, let go, and you can see that it's a nice simple vector line. And for those tall bars, or sorry, the vertical lines, you just click and drag down. Oh, hold on, let me hold shift first, so that way it's added onto the same layer. There you go. Now these are all in the same vector shape. And if you want to duplicate them, all you have to do is select a line, hold down the Alt or the Option key, and then click and drag that line off to the right, and voila, you have another separator. Relatively straightforward. Just did that and added a little bit of a glow to it, so that way it was just a little bit more interesting to look at. And then one of the last things I added in was a little bit of a lens flare on top of the eye. I believe I made that with what was it, with Knoll Light Factory. Yeah, that's basically all there is to that. I guess I've basically gone over everything that I wanted to go over. I will give you guys this full version, the dual monitor version, even though you probably won't really need this other half over here. It's really simple anyway. But regardless, guys, I hope you guys got a good idea of how I went through and created this desktop background, and you know, maybe you can use that idea to create something on your own sooner or later. But remember guys, 300 likes, you get this entire PSD for free. So as soon as the video gets to 300 likes, just keep checking the description of the video for that download link. And you know what guys, that's all I've got for you today, and I hope you have a nice Tuesday. I'll see you next week. Peace!